Um, Most importantly, he believes in consciousness and connection to consciousness. He believes in all types of modalities that help people. He's interested in constantly learning and growing, and most importantly, in sharing and teaching. With that said, Lance, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you for the welcome. So I'll give you guys a little bit of pretext on top of that of who I am and what I do. Obviously, I'm a hypnotherapist since I've been invited along here to talk with you guys. I found hypnosis abstractly through energy healing. I was doing Reiki. I'd only done a basic class and was going intuitively off working with the energy of playing with things. And I'd had a migraine for, it was very, very close to a decade. It was about 9.5 years, maybe slightly a bit over, 24/7, nonstop, no breaks at all. And I did this thing one night that was completely off intuition. It was different to everything I'd been shown. And the next day I had no migraine, gone completely. I didn't even notice when it left. I remember the moment when I was walking out of my man cave in the morning to go to work, and I was about to shut the door and I thought I'd forgotten something, and I was like, keys, wallet, phone. Yep, I'm all good. Oh, I don't have that migraine. Probably said it with a little bit more colorful language. But I realized at that moment it wasn't there, and it didn't come back. And then a little bit later, I ended up studying hypnosis because I was noticing most people I worked with energetically were going into a trance. And I didn't know anything about hypnosis. And I was worried I was going to do or say something wrong that was going to mess them up. And so I needed to learn how to deal with hypnosis. So I went along and learned a hypnosis class. It was the perfect class for me at the perfect time. It didn't really teach me many new tangible skills for what I was after. He didn't teach me how to deal with hypnosis. He just taught a bunch of different rapid inductions and some frameworks of hypnosis. And on the last day, he talked about one of his passions, which is mesmerism, which is where hypnosis began. And everything he described was very similar to what I'd been doing with Reiki that I hadn't been taught. That was just feeling. And years later, I was reading a couple 100-year-old book, and the guy described exactly the process I did the night that I'd healed myself. So I was using mesmerism, and that's why people were going into trance. And I since have then discovered a lot more about mesmerism, and I get extremely fascinated with hypnosis from this point on, and went down the rabbit hole. And the original processes I was shown were just very scripted things, and just very basic hypnosis. And I'll be honest, when I started my clinic, my results were terrible. I did not have great results. Part of that would have been my confidence in it, I'd say as well. But most of it was they were leaving, and I didn't know if the suggestions I gave stuck or not. And then I started working with idiomotor responses and engaging in at least a basic two-way communication with consciousness. And from there, my success rate went up drastically. And when in Australia, at least back then, no one was teaching anything of how to use ideomotor response or anything further from there. It was just, these are the sort of suggestions you use, and these are the sort of scripts you use were the only sort of things I could find, or these are the sort of stories you can tell, and working very Ericksonianly around things, and just hope the subconscious picks up on what you're doing. So I learned a lot of the ways I work with how I work just by seeing people and experimenting and just doing my thing. So that now I will only work with, unless I'm doing mesmerism, and usually when I do that, it still ends up a two-way communication with consciousness anyway. But unless I'm doing that, I don't feel I've done hypnosis if I haven't had some kind of feedback off the client's subconscious. So it's a little bit controversial, my view of hypnosis. I don't think hypnosis really happens until we have feedback from the subconscious of opening up these pathways of communication that's two ways with a deeper aspect of consciousness. Why I feel that that's a core part of hypnosis is that's where it all began anyway. Hypnosis evolved out of two-way communication with consciousness, and over time we all change things, and a lot of people let go of this two-way aspect. So today I'm hoping to inspire you to at least start to experiment with two-way communication, if you don't, in one of the various ways I'm going to show you here today. And today's going to be very interactive. So I mentioned to those that were here early that it'd be handy if you had pen and paper at some point through this, especially if it's on like a clipboard or in a notebook. We'll get to why as we get through it. And I'll give you guys a bonus to check out later. That part of my website that I just put in the chat is two presentations I did for Hypno Summit this year that will expand on some of what I'm teaching here today, because I will quite often work in a parts therapy dynamic, and there's an hour of me talking about parts therapy in a fairly clear way, and there's an hour on mesmerism as well if you're excited about that weird start to hypnosis. And so with today, what I'm going to be doing is a little bit about the history of communication with consciousness and why I think two-way communication is important and helpful for change work, some options of what kinds of two-way communication there can be, and then I'll not only teach you how to open those up, but I'm going to give you an experience where you get to feel and see all of these and engage with some deeper aspects of consciousness. And if anybody has any questions along the way, feel free to pop up in the chat or unmute yourself or put the little hand logo in the corner. I'm happy to have questions as we go, but we've got that gap at the end as well. During the interactive part of this, I probably would prefer no questions because I want you to experience it as much as possible, but we'll see how we go when we get there. So, as I said, hypnosis evolved out of mesmerism. A lot of schools teach mesmerism component of hypnosis, as Mesmer was a charlatan who accidentally discovered the placebo effect and rubbish like that. And if that's where you want to sit, that's fine. But if you really want to be a hypnotist, you're losing a huge part of what your practice can be if you ignore energy, because if you play with it, you'll see it really does work. So how mesmerism was, there wasn't voice, there wasn't any communication, there was energetic passes of hands over somebody that would put them in a trance. And quite often when they're in that deep trance, they would have what's called ecstatic catharsis, or somewhere in between that and a simple thing. So sometimes it's a simple thing like just twitching of a finger, like an ideomotor response. More often than not, it's big convulsing shakes of their whole body, and they'll quite often make some noises. And they would release during this whatever their issue was. Mesmer had cured blindness in one girl he worked with quite well. It was documented that her sight came back, but then she went back to her family and she went blind again. I think her family were traumatizing her, and it was being away from them that was a big part of that as well. But where it evolved into hypnosis today, come with one of Mesmer's disciples that followed on from him, Poysiger, a French guy. Poysiger, he came from a pretty rich family. His family had a cognac plantation in France, and he got to play. He had plenty of time and freedom to do what he liked and experiment with this. And so he did. And how it evolved into being what hypnosis became today was he was working with a young peasant boy that worked on his plantation, Victor Race. And as he was doing these passes and put Victor Race into trance, Victor was out. Poysiger turned around to talk to the boy's mum, to ask some questions about what he should be focusing on to heal for Victor. And before the mum could answer, Victor did. Now, Victor, being a young peasant boy in France in the mid 1700s, he didn't have much of an education at all. He was not a smart kid. He had a stutter. He just was what you could imagine a peasant farm boy would be like. But in this trance, he didn't speak like that. He had no stutter. He spoke with more intelligence than he had been granted in his lifetime. This other part of his consciousness come through, knew every second of detail of Victor's life and more. He knew everything of what went on in the background of Victor and what went on while Victor was asleep and all sorts of stuff. And he could diagnose the cure for Victor and for other people. And Poysiger found this happened with everybody, that he could get into the state that he labeled somnambulism. So somnambulism is French for sleepwalker. And he worked with this of talking to consciousness. It turned out Mesmer had the same thing, and he just ignored it. He thought it was just ramblings and didn't engage in conversation to find out more about it. But that new movement of somnambulism spread out across the world, of where people talk to these deeper parts of consciousness within people, and psychology and hypnosis evolved out of that. Now, another guy who I'm in the middle of translating his work, Guillaume Pascal Billet, he indirectly discovered ideomotor communication in April 1825. When he published the psychological research on the cause of extraordinary phenomena. And he was mesmerizing this lady who had a completely atrophied leg. It was just withered away. She couldn't walk on it. She couldn't stand on it. She couldn't move it. It had no muscles that worked in it. And as he's doing these energetic passes over just her leg, not the rest of her body, not getting her into trance, her knee started to quiver and shake side to side. And as he was doing it, he was thinking how amazing that was, and it did it again. And then he thought something else, and instead of going side to side, it went up and down. And he was curious, and he questioned, is this trying to communicate to me? I went side to side again, and he questioned, could you show me a yes? And it went side to side 3 times. Show me a no, and that went up and down 3 times. And then he began to engage in conversation with this part of her, and talk with it. Turned out it wasn't part of her; it was her holy guardian angel he was speaking to. From some of what I've translated, it seems like leading questions with that one, though, so I'm not 100% sure about that. But it evolved from there into direct voice, where this angel was communicating to him through her, and it was doing things outside of her body that affected her, and stopped her from falling over, and all sorts of amazing things that seem too weird for part of her consciousness. But he indirectly discovered that ideomotor response and that sort of communication, and he ended up changing it to that direct voice, but that drained her energy quite a lot. And so he went with an internal voice that she could hear and she'd translate to him. From there, Chevreul had worked with the pendulum just before then, but he hadn't wrote about it for another, I think it was about 8 years. I think it was 1933 that he first wrote about working with a pendulum and it being about unseen movements from our deeper mind rather than a psychic tool, which was what everybody had used the pendulum for before he did his research with it. Where it steps into the world of hypnosis is with a guy called William Carpenter, and he's the first one who really wrote about it in a psychological context. It was called the William Carpenter effect quite often because of his writings. But he coined the term ideomotor, meaning a thought into movement. He was inspired by Chevreul's work and Thomas Laycock, who was one of his research partners, who was the first guy to extend the doctrine of reflex action on the brain. Another guy they worked with was Daniel Noble, who he coined the term ideodynamics, which I like because it's a lot more diverse than just movements, which we'll get into today. And they also all worked with somebody who I'm sure you all do know, James Braid, which from working with these guys is where he got the term monoideism and monoideodynamics, which was how he was working quite regularly, was with this ideomotor response as part of the process. And he adapted that term in relation to it being the focusing of the mind unnaturally on just a single idea to create a response. Hippolyte Bernheim worked with it a lot as well, who was a massive influence on Elman, and it pretty much disappeared for a while after Bernheim, and it started to come back with Milton Erickson doing like hand levitations, things like that, and mostly up until now, at this point in time with Erickson, it had been used less for like a hypnoanalysis sort of process or engaging in conversation, and more to describe how you'd elicit post-hypnotic suggestion that gets physically actioned, would be more how it was manifesting. So once Milton had started playing with that in the 30s, one of his students, Leslie Lecron, really took it places. So in the 50s, Leslie Lecron started using it in that hypnoanalysis sort of approach and giving it a yes, a no, a maybe, and I don't know, and engaging in conversation. He influenced David Cheek, and they worked together quite a lot, and together they put the foundations out there for what the process is that most people would use today, sometimes with pendulums, sometimes with just finger signals and things like this. In more recent years, Ernest Rossi took that a little bit further with his mirroring hands approach. It's more open-ended and client-centered and client-directed. It's not what we're going to go into here today, but if you're curious about that, his mentee, who's another fellow Aussie, is Richard Hill. He's got some classes on it and a book about it. It's on Audible, it's on Amazon, and his class you can buy off his website, but he's got a new website he's part of that's a subscription thing that works out cheaper if you get it through that, and you get so much more. But it's a very different approach than what we're going to use here today, but it's quite interesting. So if this excites you today, I'd encourage you to look at Richard's work and old Ernest's stuff too. Why I'd mentioned pen and paper, we might get into some automatic writing with a couple of you, depending on how much your consciousness wants to communicate today. Automatic writing started as Fuji or spirit writing in 1368 CE China, but where it comes into the hypnosis world would probably be through the spiritualist movement in the 1850s as a spirit communication sort of thing with Edward Rogers. And it was because so many people in that world were into mesmerism and hypnosis, it bled into the hypnosis world, and Frederick Myers explored it deeply with therapy in the 1880s. Heaps more was done in therapeutic and hypnotic studies with Morton Prince in the 1890s and Anita Moore in 1920s. She came out to Australia to actually teach about it as well. She's got a quite good book on different ways you can tweak that sort of thing if you like that sort of stuff. And the surrealist movement used it for writing fiction, which is a little bit weird. Ouija boards are another thing that is as part of an ideomotor response. It's been proven time and time again. It's ideomotor communication rather than a spirit communication thing. Some people are open to that being both, but everything scientific study wise that's been done on it says, well, it's parts of your own consciousness. And so that brings us up to today of where that's been in our hypnosis world. And I was mostly focusing on that ideomotor response as that pathway through that, but it's not the only thing I use. So the other processes I use is an ideocognitive response, which is like an automatic thought. And the more you play with this in your clinic, the more you'll see it's quite interesting. You'll have like a super mini regression where you'll get a weird answer really quickly that's abstract what the client's conscious mind would think is the solution to the thing, and then following that up with ideomotor questioning, you will find out it was the cause of it, and releasing that will help move the process forward. And it can be a really interesting thing to play with, especially with self-hypnosis, to help you become your best self and more in touch with your own understandings of things. And that's part of where I'd said that the earlier guy that was working with things, Guillaume Billet, how he had that direct voice through the lady he was working on, through her, after he'd expanded from the knee, and then it went to an internal voice, and that's what he was describing as an ideocognitive response. The other ones are an idiosensory response, because not everybody can sometimes get an ideomotor response out of somebody and won't get some sort of movement that they can claim as a yes and a no and so on. So an idiosensory response will open up sight or taste or smell or feeling or hearing to be that response. Another one is postural sway, of just getting somebody to stand and asking for a yes, a yes, a yes, and seeing if they'll bend forward or backwards or side, left, right, whatever, for each sort of response. And the other you've probably noticed quite a bit in your clinic is an idioaffective response. And this usually happens without you asking for it at all. And it's an emotional, physical response, like smiles and tears and such. And usually the client will quite often make a comment where they feel like it wasn't theirs. It was just a bit weird. I've had people with snot running out of their nose, they're crying that hard, but they have no idea why, or they just say it felt really, really disconnected from them. And it's just from a deeper part of their consciousness doing that. So that can be subconscious communication of a way you can work with things. Now, why I find two-way communication is just paramount of importance is it gives you, at least to begin with, a primary thing as confirmation. You know your suggestions have worked. You know when that client walks out of your office that they're going to have a success because their part of their consciousness has said, I'm going to do this. The other way of why it's important is you know you've got a blockage if you get a no. You know when you're not going to get that success for that client. You know when you're going to need to pivot and adapt to try something else. You'll know if you need to give this deeper assistance. The other advantage is you can do investigation. You can do that hypnoanalysis to work out what track you need to be on to get to the next place. And you could also do that with regressions as well. But with this, you don't need any depth of trance. So it can be easier to access than regression. And for some people, regressions can be that little bit more traumatic. So when you're not sure if a client's open to regression, this gives you so much extra options of ways you can do things. And the other thing is it's super quick to set up, and then it's always available. So it only takes you a minute or two to set up an ideomotor response. And if at the end of your session, the only way you use it is to say, are you going to follow through on this? Yes or no? That on its own is powerful, but I use it all the way through my therapy because I want to check every step along the way of where I'm at. So I know if I need to go back over something or go over something slightly different. The other advantage is it's a different way of bypassing that critical faculty, that you're avoiding that conscious interference. And once you get used to working with ideomotor responses, you can clearly tell if it's a client's movement or if it's a subconscious movement. And there's no way they can give the answer they want. And quite often, if you work with people in waking states and you don't use trance, you'll see their shock about the answers, that it's not what they're expecting at all sometimes. And that can be quite interesting. I know when I first started playing with it in a self-hypnosis context, it was the second question I asked, I got an answer different to what I expected. And then I asked the question just a different way. And then I got the answer I expected. And it was the difference in the language of the wording I'd used that made that question make sense of why I'd got a no instead of a yes. So it was more, my consciousness was more pedantic than I was. So it's quite interesting that you see how you'll avoid that conscious interference, even if the person isn't in hypnosis or isn't in a deep state, you're still bypassing that critical faculty. So it's quite interesting how that can be. And because of that, you can do work with and access nonverbal parts of their consciousness of from times before they could talk. So David Cheek, who I mentioned earlier, he was a gynecologist and he worked a lot with people with birth traumas and things like that, and would release things from times when people were like days old, often minutes old. And with ideomotor response, pendulums, and automatic writing, as I said, you don't need trance. You can use trance, but you don't have to. And when you work out of trance, you've got two bonuses. You have the client assistance that you can stop and ask an extra question to the conscious client if you want, if you're confused of where things are at, or if you think, oh, I'm bearing in mind what this subconscious element has just told me, I need an extra piece of information. Who is this person? What's this? What's your brother's name, or something like that? The other is you've got client observation. You've got them fully aware of everything that's going on, that walking outside of your office, they've got an extra element of success because they realize how much a deeper part of their consciousness is on board with this now. It's not, the work's not handed over to the hypnotist. They're seeing how much the work is handed over to a deeper part of their consciousness. And so they're walking out feeling that the one who's going to help them is walking out with them. And that is incredibly powerful, having that client observation, knowing, oh, this is going to be there with me. So if I work with trance, I always like to amplify not amnesia, but a strong recollection of everything that transpired with that, so that they've got a remembrance of what they felt happening with their responses. But them actually watching it can be quite interesting sometimes. Having that phenomena while they're in a waking state is good. With the two-way communication, I don't always just use ideomotor response. I'll quite often get that into automatic writing or direct voice, where this element of consciousness uses their voice and talks with me. Now, they've both got their advantages. For an ideomotor response side of things, which is where I'm always going to start and what I always try for, because you're working with closed questions, so there's no excuses. If you can think of when you've caught somebody out when they're doing something wrong, what do you usually get? An excuse, especially if you're talking to a kid. Most of you look of age that you would have children or nieces or nephews at least. And whenever you catch them doing something wrong, certainly with my kids, the majority of the time, their first step, instead of saying, yeah, sorry, is, oh, it wasn't me, it was blah, or it was because of this, it was because of that. And they get really creative. And especially if you've got a somnambulist as a client, oh man, the excuses that come out of their mouths about things, of why their incredibly powerful subconscious mind has come up with this creative excuse for why success hasn't happened or why it's adapted differently. Whereas when you're working with ideomotor responses, it's just yes, no, maybe, or I don't know. There's no excuse, and you'll quite often get that success just that little bit easier. Where it's less handy is your closed questions. So with voice or writing, you get those extra details of who, what, when, where, why, how, and so on. But with that who, what, when, where, why, how, so on, you get excuses. The other is regardless of what approach you're using, you're trying to build rapport with the deeper part of consciousness and get that part of them to want to talk with you. And when you get, I know with direct voice, less so with writing, it's still somewhat with writing, but with voice, you really build a relationship up with that deeper part of consciousness, and you build a friend. And so if you work with somebody a fair few times and you've got direct voice, I generally find I need to allow more time for those people. So one client I have that has direct voice, I use parts therapy with her, and I talk to half a dozen different parts within her consciousness, and I've got friendships with all of them. So she come to see me last week, and I knew I'll book her in at 2 o'clock as my last client, and so I've got the whole afternoon because I know it's probably going to take some time, and it did. It took like 3 hours, and I rushed it. A part of her consciousness expects a cup of tea every bloody session now, and it'll sit there and have a cup of tea with me. So that can be a downside to getting voice is, well, you invest in a friendship, and once you've invested in a friendship, you've got to maintain that friendship, and otherwise you're gonna lose rapport, and you're gonna limit all the work that you could be doing with that person. Whereas when you keep it close with your motor responses, you can have that extended friendship, but they can't extend back everything they want, so you don't have to delve as much in. And when you're trying to run a clinic and see 20 people in a week or more, or hopefully you're capping it there or doing it a little bit less so you don't burn yourself out, but you want to be able to know that you're not going to be late for that next client. And so there's different ways you can work with these sort of things. You can ask investigative sort of questions, or you can just have post suggestion and a confirmation. I've done a bunch of suggestions for half an hour. Do you agree? Will you do these things? Will you do everything I've suggested here today? Is there anything of that you're going to have trouble with? Things like that you can do to lock in what you've just done. If you're used to direct suggestion, or you're used to talking in metaphors, you can say at the end of that, did you understand that metaphor? I've quite often found sometimes people say that the subconscious works entirely in metaphor. I found it's been quite confused by a lot of metaphors, and it wants it spelled out directly. So some people's consciousness can't catch up with those, especially if they're on the spectrum. I found I've got nowhere with suggestions in a metaphor context with somebody on the autism spectrum. You can switch. If you're getting lots of yeses, you'll quite often start to notice, especially your motor response, you'll be getting flickers of a yes when you're not even asking a question. Like how when you're talking to a friend and they agree with you, they just start nodding as you're talking and smiling and going along. And if I get a lot of that, I will switch with alternating with suggestions, because I don't need to phrase it as a question. They're already telling me they agree. So I'll just go into quicker suggestions to get there, and then follow that up with a question that checks. The next one is one that's you've got to be really careful with. I know rule number one for hypnosis is no leading, but sometimes leading is needed. So definitely not in the hypnoanalysis concept. Don't lead there. You never want to lead in hypnoanalysis, because you want to find out what the real problem is and work with that. But from the moment you start with them, you want to be leading, because you want to lead them to the solution. You want to lead them to walking out happier, healthier, whatever it is they've come to see you for. So sometimes I'll ask a question that has no purpose other than helping lead that part of their consciousness to my solution before I have to say it, to create that thought of this pathway might be good. And so some of that will be leading in the way of creating doubt about what the issue is, and leading into a doubt about the way they've been doing things to create this better solution moving forward. But you want to always be edging towards the solution. And so finding the right places to put those leading questions in, so that your follow-up question gets a lot easier response, or your follow-up suggestion gets a lot better response, can be good. The other thing, you can use questioning to build rapport, of asking different things that show this part of consciousness that you're interested in it, that you care about it, that you're not there to judge it, and you see its power and strength. And some people like to use it as a confirmation of depth to work out how deep you are. Leslie Cron, who I talked about earlier, he always used that. He used a yardstick analysis. Doesn't make sense to any Aussies because we got rid of the imperial system eons ago. But you guys, that would make sense a lot more too. And it's slightly different with every client of where it's at, but you can sort of work out where you are in depth with things. And then the obvious one is the change-making agreements, that sort of questioning. And so Stephen's mentioned this part terminology is used for working with dissociative identity disorder clients. Yes. With DID, you've got parts that are not working together as a team. They're very separated. And everybody has different parts to their consciousness from what I've found from exploring, communicating with people's consciousness. But with most people, they're at least somewhat on board with each other. Whereas with DID, there's usually been trauma involved and a part has gone completely rogue and just takes over at different times to keep them safe and in a very abstract way. Realistically, all of you have had that happen where a part has just taken over, but you haven't noticed because it's in flow with the rest of your life. With most hypnotherapists have used the example of hypnosis happening in highway hypnosis context. Highway hypnosis is the driving part of you just taken over and doing things. So a framework I want you to keep in mind through all of when you're working with hypnosis is just because consciousness wants to talk to you doesn't mean it knows how to yet. And at the same time, if it does know how to you, it might not yet want to talk to you. So as I work from the moment the client books in, I'm trying to think what could be the purpose behind why this part of their consciousness might be creating this issue that they want solved. Usually it's coming from a good place. If most of my work is with anxiety. So the way I see anxiety is like an overprotective parent. Hands up here if you've been an overprotective parent in your times of parenthood. Oh, I have. Hands up if you did that from a place of just wanting to be a terrible person and ruin your child's life. Oh, I never normally see a hand with that one. It was a trick question, Kat. That's okay. It's always done out of love, isn't it? You're always doing it for wanting to care for and protect it. It's called overprotective for a reason. You're loving, you want to keep them safe. So safe you'll stop their fun sometimes because you think it's so important. And an anxious part inside wants to keep them so safe they will stop their fun. And once you realize that dynamic of whatever's happening with that issue, usually it's part inside just being overprotective and it's putting its foot down, not realizing that the client has a lot more strength than this part is giving him credit for. And so empowering the part to start to do some experiments to learn how to trust that client will help amplify that and open that up to take it a lot further. So I'd like to teach you how to set all of this up. It's quite simple. You're just going to ask, but I want to give you an experience with it. So we'll see how we're going with time. Tish, is it another 45 minutes we've got, or I'm just double checking before I go. You're on mute though, so I can't hear you.
It's about another 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
30, okay,
30,
good.
35
All
minutes.
right, easy. Plenty of time. So I'd like you to have that pen and notebook handy, because with that time, I think I'm going to have enough time to be able to see if part of your consciousness wants to write to us as well. But don't have the pen in hand just yet, because you're not going to need it straight away. And I'm not going to use hypnosis for it, but if you want to use a self thing to get yourself deeper, you're quite welcome to. As I said, you don't need hypnosis for this, but sometimes it can be a little bit clearer with it. But I'll be honest, in my clinical practice, I use trance maybe 20% of the time nowadays. Most of the time I work with waking states because I don't need trance to get the work done. So with this, I'm going to be doing some idiosensory bits. So it would be good if your eyes are at least closed, but they don't have to be until I get to those bits. Whatever you're comfortable with is okay with me. So if you want to close your eyes, now would be the time to do it. And you can take a nice deep breath and relax if you like, or you can tense your body up if you like. I don't mind either way. I prefer you be relaxed and comfortable though, because I'd like you to enjoy it. And I'd like to open up communication with the hypnotist inside of all of you, with the therapist that cares and wants to see you help your clients the best into the future. I'd like to talk with you today, not just to you, not at you, but with you. I'd like to introduce you to your conscious self and have them be able to talk with you and give you thanks and respect for the way you help them and all their clients. And I know you inside have way, way more power, intelligence, and creativity than you've ever been given credit for, especially by your conscious person. And I would like to help them realize your power, your intelligence, and your creativity, and to be able to make use of that and respect you for that. So in a moment, I'm going to try and communicate with you, and I'd love for you to come out to talk with me here today and your person. And so to the conscious person sitting there, I'd like you to have your hands on your lap and have them so your palms are facing upwards. This just gives that extra opportunity for movement. If your hands are more comfortable face down, that's okay too. But to that hypnotist inside, as I said, I would love to talk with you. And I know you're capable of this, so I'd like you to connect down into those hands, into those arms, into those palms, and into each and every one of those fingers. And when you're there, I'd like you to give them a flick of a finger, just a twitch, quiver, a flicker of any one of those fingers. And I'd like you to do it again, a little bit stronger, a little bit bigger, clearer. That's it. And again. And now a different finger. There we go. And do that one again, and a little bit bigger as well. And now we've got two different signals. So with that, we can have communication. So I'd like you to show a signal. Pick one of those fingers that you can move that can represent a yes. And show your person how you'd like to say yes with a flick of one of those fingers. A yes, a yes, a yes. So that if they ever want to ask a question, they will know whether or not you agree. Show them that yes again, a little bit bigger and clearer. A yes, a yes, a yes, a yes. And each and every time you do this, you can learn how to do it a little bit better, a little bit clearer. And now we don't want blind compliance out of you. We're not here to force you into doing anything. We want to know when there's resistance, when there's something you don't agree with, when there's something you don't align with. So I'd like you to show them a no, and no, and no. A little bit bigger and clearer, and no. Now you can say no. No is an important word, and there's been many times throughout your life you've needed to say no, and sometimes you haven't had the strength or courage to do so. And I want you to always have the strength or courage to say no if you really need it, so that your person can work out the best way to move forward with you. And then things are not always black and white. Sometimes there's this gray area in between where you need a maybe, a kind of, a somewhat, a perhaps. So could you show a different finger that represents this maybe? Maybe. Kinda. A somewhat. A perhaps. Show them that maybe again. Then I know you're intelligent, but sometimes we all ask questions that are just hard to answer. I might ask a silly question like, do you know how far away the moon is from the earth right now in millimeters or inches? And I would be guessing you would not know the answer to that question. So could you show them a way to say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And now I'd like you to use that creativity of yours to really have some fun. And we're going to go over each of these responses again, but I don't want you to do it with that finger that you used before. And maybe you still want to do it with that as well, and that's okay. But I'd like to see how much power you got in all the other different ways. So I'd like you to show them a color or a picture that represents yes. That hypnotist inside, show them a color or a picture that represents yes, yes, yes. A color or a picture that represents no, no, no. A color or a picture that represents maybe, kinda, somewhat, perhaps. A color or a picture that represents I just don't know. Color or a picture that represents I don't know. Now, some of you might have been able to do that, and some of you might not, and that's okay. Everybody's consciousness is different pathways it can communicate with. And so now I'd like that hypnosis part of you to play a little more. And let's see if you can create a sound or a song that represents yes. An internal sound or song that represents yes. Wonderful. And an internal sound or song that represents no. An internal sound or song that represents that maybe, that someone, perhaps. And that internal sound or song that might represent if you just don't know. Again, for some of you, this might have worked, some of this might not. It's okay. Don't stress about it. And I'd really like to go a little bit deeper with this hypnotist inside of opening up the most opportunities for communication possible. So I'd love for you to play a little bit more. And from here on in, I want to really ask that you play nicely. And I'd like you to create an internal smell or a scent that represents yes. An internal scent or a smell that represents yes, yes, yes. If you could, please. And then, as I said, playing nicely. This is specifically the one I want you to play nicely with. That internal smell or scent for a no. A no. A no. If you want to be cheeky, you can do it the not nice way, but I prefer you be nice to the person in the chair. A smell that says no. And then that smell for in between, the maybe, the kind of, the somewhat. Scent to represent maybe. And then a new scent that represents if you just don't know. And I don't know. Smell or a scent that says you just don't know. And let's amplify this again, hypnotist inside, and see how creative you can be. And see if you can create a taste that says yes, a flavor of yes, a flavor of yes. And again, playing very nicely with this one, please, a flavor of no, a flavor of no, a taste that says no. And a taste for a maybe. A taste for a maybe. A taste for a maybe. And then a taste for I don't know. A flavor that says you just don't know. Flavor for if you don't know. Doing wonderful so far. Hypnotist inside. I would love to show your power even more now. And I'd like you to give your person a feeling, just a feeling within their body. It can be anywhere, it can be everywhere, whatever works for you. A feeling for a yes. A feeling for a yes. Some sort of sensation they could feel in their body that says yes, yes, yes. And then a nice firm no feeling. No, no, and no. Nice strong no feeling. And then a feeling that says that maybe, maybe, maybe. and a feeling that says, if you just don't know. Feeling that says, I don't know. Feeling that says, I don't know. And now to that incredibly powerful hypnotist inside, I'd like you to really show your power now. We're going to go through it once more. And this time, I would like for you to either show your favorite one of these or all of these, as many as possible of these at once for each of these responses. So everything you want to show your person to represent a yes, a yes, a yes, a yes, a yes, a yes. And then every sensation you want to do to represent a no, a no, a no. I apologize if you hear my child saying no by screaming in the background. I want you to show your client the clearest way you've got. No, no, no. And then a maybe. Maybe, maybe, maybe. And then just in case you don't know, the I don't know, but the I don't know. Any or all of those senses. And now I really want you to be seen, heard, felt, and understood. I want your power to be amplified and to come out as much as possible, because each one of you get the opportunity to work with people in need. Some people whose lives are in absolute devastation, some people whose lives are in trauma and destroyed, and some people whose lives just need a tweak, need a boost. So I really want this hypnotist inside to be as powerful and as heard as possible. And there's going to be a skill that your conscious person is going to be able to make a lot of use out of. And that's for you to be heard inside as that idiocognitive thing that I talked about before. A thought, an internal voice. So I would love for you internally, just in their mind, give them a thought of a hello. And to give them a thought right now of where you'd like to see them take their hypnosis practice. You can use any of those senses as well to amplify this. And I would like you to also give them this thought, this idea of what they would be best using some self-hypnosis with to engage in conversation with you about later. And it can be about their hypnosis practice, or it can just be about their life in general. Or maybe it's about a different part inside that they need to talk to, but I want you to give them that clear thought or idea of what they can use some self-hypnosis to work with. And if they're questioning whether that's really you, show them a yes. And now, as I said, I'd like I'd like to keep taking this further. I'd like to have you have as much power shown as possible and to be as understood as possible. And so I'm not asking you to do this yet. I'm just asking if you think you could. And I'd like you to give your person that response of yes, no, maybe, I don't know, depending on how you feel about it. If I ask them to pick up that pen and that piece of paper, if you think you'd be able to write to them. And if you got a no there, that's okay. If you got a yes, I'd like to ask this part inside again, another question of if you've got a preference of a hand that you prefer to write with, I'd like you to give a flicker of a finger on that hand so that they know what hand to put that pen in. And if that is different to the hand you're using to signal in, to still keep yes or no's happening, either inside in a different sense or on the other hand. And if you got a yes for those and you know what hand to use, I'd like you to pick up that pen now and place it over that paper. And this is why I said it's handy to have a notebook or a clipboard so you can have it on your lap. And place that pen in that hand, put it on that page. And to the hypnotist inside, I would love to see you manifest something onto that paper. And just try to begin with just by making a line or a circle. And then see if you can actually write. See if you can say hello. And if there's a deeper message you would like to get through to your conscious person, I'd like you to allow that to come through. I can see the amazing hypnotist inside of Kat is doing wonderful there at the moment. Any of you that haven't got there yet to that hypnotist inside, I know you can later. And I'd like you to think about it and learn how. And every time your conscious person does write, I'd like you to pay attention with the little things they do, the different movements of their hands to maneuver a pen or pencil on paper, so you can communicate to them with that later. And now, bearing in mind you're on mute, so no one will hear you other than the people in your household or your office, I'd like to really amplify the way this hypnotist inside can communicate. And if you're still writing, that's okay. You can keep writing. I'd like to open up the opportunity for you to vocally communicate. So if you're capable, I'd like you to connect in to their neck, their jaw, their mouth, their tongue, their voice box, their lungs, everything that gets used to vocally communicate. And see if you can make a movement of that jaw, a movement of that tongue. Or if you'd like, just to straight out say hello. And if there's an extra message you'd like to deliver again with this voice, I would love for you to do so. Even if it's just a compliment. Wonderful. Now, I'd like to ask this hypnotist inside, and you can use any of these methods you prefer to answer this for your conscious person. If they're willing to talk with you again on their own, would you talk with them just as clearly as you are now? If they open that gateway, just so they know. And with those that have voice at the moment, while we've got that happening here, if the hypnotist inside would like to have that come through to the other people in the group here, to let your conscious person know with yes, so that they can unmute. If you want to be heard to others, I'll give you this brief opportunity now. That's okay. Just inside, I want to thank you for everything you've done to come forward to be heard and understood here today. And I would like to ask an extra little thing of you. And over the coming nights, when your conscious person is asleep, I would like you to go through their entire memories of everything they've ever experienced in relation with hypnosis, with therapy, with everything that can work with that, like energy healing or EMDR or tapping or any of their other therapies. And I would like you to build up a really clear file inside, neatly organized, of all of this information they've been exposed to, every class they've done, every book they've read, every video they've watched, every meeting like this they've come to, every session they've done, every session that's been done on them. I would like you to put all of that knowledge together, that it can be accessed at any time, that you can use these idiocognitive thoughts and ideas as ways of bringing these pieces of information forward to the conscious mind at any time in their life when it could be used, whether this is in session or out of session, as long as it's ethical. And what I would really love you to do from now on through the rest of their life is use that incredible creativity of yours to mix and match all of that information together, to create some connections that nobody else has created before, because nobody's had your unique knowledge, understandings, creative, and experience to be able to connect those dots yet, where you will. I'd like you to use all that creativity to connect all that together to help us come up with new solutions for clients, to help the world have some extra access to new ideas, thoughts, and beliefs of how therapy can happen. And anything that they learned from now on, I'd like you to put into this clear access memory as well, as soon as they learn. And if I haven't already asked too much of you, I'd like you to do one more little bonus task for me, if you could, please. And this one is quite simple, but it's going to make a profound difference in their life if you really play with this. I'd like you to simply look out in the background all day, every day, for something wonderful, for the everyday joy, love, and beauty in the world. And when you spot it, I'd like you to draw their attention to it, help them notice it. I'd like you to see what you can do to crack a smile on that face, maybe even a laugh or a giggle. And every time you get that through, I'd like you to think you've done a job well done. And I'd like you to challenge yourself to do it more and more often. To help them to notice the wonderful things in their life, to help them appreciate that, to help them to notice the times where their work makes a difference, to help them to see how great they are, how great their lives are, and despite all the challenges that can come up. I'd like you to connect them to the gratitude of the different people, places, things, events that have made a difference within their life. And if it's appropriate, it's applicable, I'd like you to connect them over using examples of that with other people, if it's appropriate, to connect other people to the same things that have made a difference in their life, to open other people up to those same gifts, skills. That when they see something beautiful in the world, that they can tap somebody next to them on the shoulder and say, look at that. Isn't the world wonderful? And each and every day from now on, I want you to get better and better with all of this, in each and every way that you can. And everything I've talked about here today, if you've got a way of making it better, or amplifying it, or adapting it to your person's life that I haven't thought to say, as long as it's safe, it's ethical and it's legal, I would love for you to just do that. Make it happen. So heaven's just inside. I want to thank you for your time here today with this. And as we move into the question and answer part, I would love for you to help connect your person with some good questions for me of what you'd like them to ask. And to eventually step back into the background and do your normal daily role. And whenever you're ready, everybody, you can open your eyes and come fully back to the room. And you can unmute yourself and ask some questions. As actually, before I get to questions, to help you all understand that everybody's slightly different, so you don't feel bad if you miss some of those answers. Hands up if you got a finger response. Excellent. Hands up if you got the internal visual of a yes/no response. Fantastic. Hands up if you got an internal sound or song for a yes/no response. A feeling. A taste. A smell. Hands up if your subconscious was cheeky and gave you a taste or a smell of poo or something nasty for a no. Hopefully, I asked him to play nice. I apologize. Sometimes happens. Okay, but not everybody got 100% on all of that. And that is the case. So realize if you're asking for a response of consciousness with a client and you don't get it, there's probably another avenue that their consciousness can do, and the client will just translate for you. And they can just say yes, or they can move a finger consciously to represent what they're sensing inside. Hands up if you got the thought or the idea, the ego-cognitive response. Fantastic. Make use of that. I want you to have some self-hypnosis practice where you, after you get some of those, you connect in and you ask for a yes, no, did that come from you, hypnotist inside? So that while you're working in your clinic, if you start getting random ideas, that you can start to know, I can trust to say those ideas and they're going to therapeutically make a massive change for my client. Because that hypnotist inside is going to really do some things. Hands up if you got writing on that page. Hands up if the writing actually is legible and makes sense. Sometimes they're not going to be. Hands up if you got voice. I've seen a few mouths move, but excellent. So now I'd love to hear some questions from you. If you've got them. Scott, you got the hand on there. You're muted though.
There we go. Very fascinating. Thank you very much. A broader experience with ideomotor communication. My thought is that it almost projects a separate part, being separate from the person itself. With the brain's negative propensity, what happens if then they associate that with something external that starts working in the negative?
Anything negative can be turned into a positive. So, like I said, I work with anxious clients, and people get weirded out with one of my comments. I think an anxious part inside is perfect. It's just doing things the wrong way. So an anxious part inside can be heard. People hear the negative parts quite easy because in the Western world, we're trained to listen to negativity. Like I know at least in Australia, for me, it was the case that in primary school and high school, like the whole cultural thing is a tall poppy syndrome. If you too good, too smart, too cool, you get cut down. And we're used to having people cut us off and tell us we're not good enough with different things. And the worst thing you'll hear in the world is going to come inside. If anybody says anything bad to you, it'll take seconds before your consciousness will amplify that because it wants you to fit in and adapt. And so a negative voice inside, what I like is that can be heard. So I know that part of consciousness has a loud, clear, internal ideocognitive response happening all the time. Now, if I can build rapport with that part and teach it to do some experiments of talking with the client a different way, and I can get it to become nice, which it usually can, then their life can be amazing because they've got a clear voice inside that's now their cheerleader instead of their prison warden. So naturally, we're going to focus on that negative voice, but with this, you're talking with that negative voice, so you can change the way it talks. It just takes time, and I find that word I've used is experiment. Getting that part to experiment with trying something new. It's been trying this way for probably decades and gotten nowhere. So it can do an experiment, and if the experiment fails, it can go back to the old way. But if it tries something new and it gets respected for it, and it's appreciated and it still gets the end result, then it's going to go that way, and it'll work with it. So yeah, does that answer your question, Scott?
Yes, thank you very much.
Excellent. Kat's got a yes tick there. I think that means a question.
I do. And first of all, Lance, I'd like to acknowledge what an amazing addition to the ideomotor process. So without taking too much time on this, because I know my other co-members, hi, everybody, have other questions. You said that you work with people with anxiety. So there's the state of a person being in anxiety, and they may have certain ideomotor responses. And once the person comes out of anxiety, or actually, let me also check it this way. Do you work with people multiple times, the same person?
Yes. Yeah, I prefer to see people at least 5 times.
Okay, at least 5 times. And do
5
you-
times I can get their life better than what they thought they were booking in for.
oh, that sounds great. And do you see, do you always check the idiomotor signals at the beginning of each session? And
Yes.
are you working with different parts that have different responses? So
Yes.
maybe they might use one finger as one part or another finger as another part?
Yes. So sometimes, occasionally, I'll work with different parts within a session. Usually, I'll leave it with one part per session. But I always check the responses at the beginning of each and every session just in case, because sometimes they change. Sometimes they stay the same. I draw a little hand in the bottom corner of my page, and I use a different color pen each session or a different page each session. But I'll have a look and see if it's the same responses. And quite often they do change, and it can be an indicator that there's a different part there. But sometimes it's just changed for a different thing.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Really, really loved your presentation.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed. Any other questions? Yes, Stephen.
I'm wondering if you actually put the pen in the person's hand?
Yes, in the clinic, I'll put the pen in their hand and I'll hold my clipboard underneath.
Okay.
And go with that. Quite often you have to slow it down. I didn't have time to slow it down of asking it to draw each letter individually, because quite often you get like a running writing sort of thing, and cursive can be really hard to read, especially in automatic writing. So I ask for one letter at a time and to space it out, to sometimes tell it to lift the pen off the page. Anita Moole had a really cool idea, which I hadn't thought of till I read her book, which was because quite often the letters will be written over the top of one another. And when you see that happening, I would move my clipboard along, but she said to just gently nudge their hand along as they're writing, and it quickly learns to move the wrist as well. And I found that has helped, having that adaptation. Sometimes you get symbols and stuff drawn. Sometimes it gets really weird and it doesn't make sense until you hold it up to a mirror. There's things to go through if you're having difficulty with it. But yeah, I put the pen in their hand, the clipboard underneath, and I'll watch really closely for each letter. And so sometimes I'll be asking, is that an A? And looking at the other hand for the yes, no response. And I'll ask other questions with idiomotor responses as I go to help make that clarity there as we're getting somewhere. Jean.
Thank you, Lance. This is amazing, and I'm very interested in all the different idio type of responses you're getting. I've done the like Dabney Ewan's, just the finger like when the hand's this way. I've used that.
Yep.
But I'm going to be exploring these others. Where should we start for mesmerism? I'm very interested in going down that rabbit hole.
Well, there's an hour presentation on that link I shared there earlier. That'll give you a bit of a start to go from there. I don't know of anybody that teaches it in America. I only know of myself, another Aussie, an English guy, and a French guy. So it's not the easiest thing to learn online. So I was asked to do something online earlier this year, and I refused because it just didn't feel right. The only one I know of that is online is Marco Perez, Mesmeritis, I think it's called, or something similar to that. But you really just need to either read old texts and experiment, or find somebody to practice with. When travel is open again, I do have a plan to to come to your soil and run some things, but it's not at the moment. It's too risky. I was asked to go to Peru last month, and I said no because I didn't know if I'd be able to come back. So I was like, "Can I take up on that offer in another year, maybe?" We'll see. Yes, I could share that link again. I'll share another one as well of using this in self-hypnosis context if you're not quite sure of how to do that. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
My writing turned out to be in images, not letters. Is that significant for anything?
No, it's just the way things happen sometimes. It's in symbolism. So following that up with questioning of does this mean something? Does this mean, and ask questions about what you think it might mean. I'll quite often get symbolism in the middle of writing, like, so it'll write something, and then it'll give a tick or a cross for a yes, no answer, or it'll write a smiley face.
Huh.
So, yeah.
I have three birds flying and a ball rolling. So
I don't know. Birds usually mean
Yeah.
freedom, but could be soar, go to new heights with what you do. But I'd follow that up with some questioning to find out.
okay.
And there was somebody else that started talking there at the same time.
That was me. So I was wondering if how the visual and the sound and the taste, are those things that you teach clients primarily for use with self-hypnosis, or do those occur in sessions? And if so, how does the client communicate that or externalize that if it's a color or whatever?
I will mostly use that if I'm not getting a response of a finger. If I can't get an ideomotor response, and I always want communication. I always want feedback. So it's just that frustration of I didn't feel hypnosis was happening if I wasn't getting feedback, because I want to know I've connected with this part of consciousness. So I'd use one of those other ones to find out if I got something, and then I'll just get the client to communicate it to me. And most people just say yes, say no. The last guy I had happen with it, he moved his finger for me, and I thought, oh, okay, that's good. I'm happy with that. Halfway through the session, the finger signals were ideomotor responses. They weren't him moving it. The next session I did, his hand was going crazy. They were full on ideomotor response, and he's like, "Oh man, I definitely didn't move that this time," because it learns how to do things better as we go. So you don't always need to keep using that same route. But I'll do, if I'm doing trance-based hypnosis, I'll do a test to work out all of those things, so I know the way their consciousness communicates to them before I begin, as a quick little thing to know what sort of language to use when I'm talking to them in trance, so that if they're not a visual person, I don't want to tell them to visualize something, because they're not going to be able to. If they've got taste as a high thing and they're here for weight loss, well, I'm going to press on different flavors of things to help do things. So if it fits with their therapy of an extra sensation, I'll test to see if I can create the sensation to work with it.
Thank you. Terrific presentation.
That's okay. And now I realize I'm out of time. So if there's any extra questions you guys have, feel free to reach out to me. I'm open to talk anytime. Quite easily found on social media, or you've got my website there for sending me an email. Happy to have a chat if you have other questions. So thanks for coming along and participating and being open to something new. If you want to know more about this sort of stuff, you can also book sessions with me or one-on-one mentoring. I do, if I've got 1 second to have a quick plug, I do have a class coming up. If this is stuff that interests you, I have a whole thing. It's starting at pretty much the same time this started, but in July on the 13th, 20th, and 27th. Actually, they're my days. It's on my Wednesdays and be on your Tuesdays. On how to amplify all of this sort of stuff with hypnoanalysis of how to really get parts that want to talk with you, of how to do different questioning and how to initiate all this stuff a little bit deeper and easier for fast, effective change.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. This was great.
Lance.
Yeah, wonderful.